Welcome back, MTG Joe here, and we're here with the return of the weekly meta breakdown where we go over the MTG Arena stats for the best performing decks for each of the formats. The new set Wilds of Eldraine is here, and it's only been out for a couple days now, so we're not going to do the traditional deep dive, full analysis. Really what I just wanted to do with this video, because we don't have a huge amount of accumulated data, but people keep asking for it, is get something out there, especially ahead of the weekend, to just say, you know, these are some of the ideas that are working right now. These are some of the ideas that are not working, just to kind of save people potentially some wild cards, especially as they go into the weekend if they want to try out the new set. We'll be back once we, over the weekend, starting next week. I'll do the full kind of breakdown. We'll look at best of three. We'll do all that. And as soon as we get the data for the Eternal formats, Explore, and Historic, we'll do that. And with Alchemy rotation, we'll also look at the decks there. So we'll do this every week. So make sure to kind of follow the channel, sub if you haven't done so. We're almost at 10,000 if you see in the top right-hand corner. We're less than 100 away. So we come out with all these stats every week. We get the stats from Untapped GG, what you see on the screen, companion tool that runs alongside Arena's client. Aggregates win rates for all the users, gives us a cool bunch of stats if you want to get started with Untapped. Link is in the video description. I'll paste all these deck lists as well in the video description. You can just import them to Arena. So I want to preface by saying it's been like a day and a half. This is being recorded on the 7th. The Wilds came out midway through on the 5th. So no hot takes, no like this is completely useless or whatever. This is the best deck in the format. Largely, if you have existing best of one decks in Standard, they're still all doing well. The top decks, I'm just going to cover new decks in this video, or like changes to existing decks, but mono white humans, blue white soldiers, variations of mono red, Selesnya enchantments, all continuing to do well in their stock version. Similarly, we're not going to go through the popularity of the day because a lot of this is going to be kind of skewed with some of the older data, being that it still looks at rotation. So we're going to jump into it. So looking at new decks themselves, and then I'll cover some decks that you should probably avoid right now. So mono red, there's a lot of different variations. Admittedly, I'm trying the Virtue of Courage versions. It's been medium, just, slightly above 50%. So this version seems to be a little bit cleaner. And the new cards in this list are Godric Cloaked Reveler. So this card allows you to have a 3/3 for 3 with haste, and then if 2 permanents enter the battlefield that turn, it becomes a 4/4 flying, and then you can pump any amount of red mana into it to give it fire breathing, so extra power. So you can trigger it a number of ways. Things like Squee gives you the extra token, the Kumano flipping, and then a second spell, or just naturally casting 2 permanents for the turn. This version here is on a bit of burn, so you have like your lightning strikes, your play of fires, kind of the stock list. The other innovation with this list is the Monstrous Rage. So this card gets to push through huge amounts of damage, gives trample, also creates a roll token. So this allows you to get that second permanent and give something permanent kind of haste as long as the roll is remaining on it. This version is also on Chandra for some additional card advantage in that sense. So this one's at 62% win rate. We won't go deep dive when it's like the stock list. So this next list of mono blacklist, it's at literally 100 games, which is the threshold. So it's not showing the win rate, but it's at 58% here. And this version here has got a toolbox package of Beseech the Mirror. And then this card allows you to sack any sort of tokens, artifacts, or enchantments, and then tutor up. So you'll notice a number of one-ofs in the deck. You have things like Phyrexian Obliterator, Rankle's Prank, Virtue. So you can search the Virtue. I believe you can cast the Lockwing Scorn, but you can't cast the other half. The 5 drops you can tutor both Ashiok, the new Ashiok in here, which makes like tokens, kind of card advantage in that way, as well as Gix Command, but you can't cast them. You have Back for Seconds, which is another bargain effect, which lets you kind of reanimate, so you can bring back your Shield Druids, whatever it may be. It's got the Hopeless Nightmare that can be sacked after. So it comes in, this is a lot of utility in these bargain decks because it comes in, forces your opponent to discard, they lose 2 life, and then you also get the ability to sack it and then scry. So all for 1 mana, a lot of value in that sense. You have Spiteful Hexmage, 1 mana 3/2. Comes in, you have to put a curse token on one of your creatures, which creates a base power of 1/1, but that's something you can sack afterwards. Candy Grapple as a decent removal spell on its base, but you can bargain it for -5/5, and that should kill most of the threats in the format. Jadar makes you token every turn for bargain fodder. You also have Witch's Vanity. So it's early removal, creates a food for life gain, and then gives a Wicked Roll, which is a +1/1, and when the roll goes into the graveyard, your opponent loses 1 life. Also 4 Braids in here, letting you sack those roll tokens from like Jadar, tokens from Lord Skitter. So a lot of ways to kind of force your opponent into sacrificing stuff or giving you card advantage. Some Sheoldreds in there as well because it's mono black and play Sheoldred. So then we go to Golgari Midrange, 55% win rate. So this is kind of what's historically referred to as the rock, kind of that mid-range 2-for-1 value. So a bunch cheaper removal, you have cut downs, go for the throats, Terra Sunders, Edicts. You also have the new card Mosswood Dread Knight. So for 2 mana, that gets you to draw a card and lose a life. Then it's a trample 3/2, and then if it's in your graveyard, you can cast the adventure part again and put it back on adventure. So it's a recursive threat with a decent body. Briarbridge Tracker gets you tokens, just a good attacker in. Gix for card advantage. Gissa makes the combat math really awkward. A lot of Lilianas to eat out your opponent's hands. You have 6 cards that can be discarded for value and can come back from your graveyard. You have some Planeswalkers and Sorin and Ashiok, the Sheoldred package, and then 3 copies of the Virtue on the top end. This deck's also playing 3 of the new Restless Cottage as a creature utility land in that sense. From there, we go to Esper Control. So these are kind of live updating. So the Esper decks actually more recently just put up a couple more wins and jumped ahead in percentage. But this is kind of your control deck, Planeswalker Control. So we see Ashiok again, Jace Perfected Mind, Wandering Emperor. This version's on Staff of Completion that allows you to proliferate for 3 life and just try to ultimate your creatures faster. Also can be used as card draw. So a bunch of utility there. You have like just a bunch of removal, counter spells, life gain. You have the sweepers and then the Virtue on the top end as well. This version is also playing 3 of the Restless Fortress. It's a 1/4 land that when it attacks you, drain your opponent 2 life and you gain 2 life. So it can help with those kind of grindier matchups. And don't worry about copying cards one by one. I'll paste them all in the deck list. I'll timestamp it. It's easy to kind of go from there. We then go to Rakdos Midrange Roles kind of deck. So this one is playing Lord Skitter's Blessing. This is a 2 mana enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you get a Wicked Roll. Again, that's +1/1, and when the roll goes into the graveyard, your opponent loses a life. Beginning of your draw step, if you control an enchanted creature, you lose a life and draw an additional card. Now, notably, this is not a May effect. So if your opponent has Sheoldred, you are drawing 2 cards. So worth noting there. So a lot of ways to kind of get bargain fodder or just things to sack. So you have Annihilating Glare that cares about sacrificing an artifact or creature. So you have Spiteful Hexmage. Again, we mentioned creating the roll token, Torch the Tower. This could be a 1 mana, kind of deal 3 with Exile and Scry. If you bargain it, making a artifact token, making an artifact token. Scoundrel has been really impressive to me. I've liked it in mono red. It gives you the ability to either loot, create a treasure token to ramp, or create a Wicked Roll. Then you have your bargain fodder, so you have Back for Seconds, which is the reanimation kind of unearth combo. The Braids, as we mentioned in the other deck. Then Twisted Fealty. So this allows you to, it's kind of your threaten effect. You steal a creature and then you get to create a Wicked Roll on that. So you can steal it, sack it to the Braids as well. We then go to Gruul Aggro, and there's a lot of card decks here we're just going to highlight now, and I'm not really going to post these lists because these are all 50% or lower, but these are things that people have been trying that just haven't been winning much. So again, sample size is small, but these are some ideas that I just want to run by folks for their awareness. Now, these are still things you might want to try out, so just let me know in the comments, but I won't go into like heavy detail in terms of like, here are the deck lists, whatever it may be. Because they're just not putting out much. It's more of kind of a warning stage, but this is Gruul Aggro, kind of Gruul Pump, so using Ruby and Daring Tracker as like a ramp effect. You have like just ways to pump up your team, and then you could fling them with Eldraine. You have the Questing Druid for card advantage, the Raiju. So think of it like a modified kind of aggro list in that sense. You have the Royal Treatment as a protection spell, Monstrous Rage. But generally speaking, these decks just don't have much removal or card advantage, so you're kind of very limited to your opening hands. So I usually tend to avoid them. They're very, very linear, without kind of that backup game plan. Azorius Control, so this is a version from CGB, I'm assuming, because I played him in early access on this. So the Hornlock Whale, I think, is a very good card. It's a very good tempo element, flash in, it's good beater. Kind of surprised this list is doing so poorly. It seems to have like equipped cards that can be doing well. It might need some more early interaction. I think things like having a bunch of 3-mana counters isn't great. Stroke of Midnight being a 3-mana removal spell is a little bit slow. I would probably just increase like the amount of March of Otherworldly Lights, the amount of cheap interaction, since you're heavily reliant on like your 5 and 6 mana sweepers. Where in like if your opponent plays Thalia, you're in a pretty bad spot, all things considered. But I think the core of this could be reasonable. And then we go ahead and move into Dimir Fairies. So this was the highest win rate deck of Fairies that I found, which was 50%. There's ones in the 30%. And I think the big thing with Fairies, having played the deck as well, I don't think this card is very good. Like, it's very slow to get started. It's a heavy mana investment. And even when you untap it, it just removes a stun counter. So it doesn't even like circumvent that. It's also a very bad late draw because it doesn't really do much at that point. I think the Fairy spells are very good. Fairy Fencing and Spell Stutter. But there's just not enough flash threats. Like this is a good card, but it's legendary, so you don't get to stack them. The Looter is not really needed in this type of deck. Talions is pretty understated, and it's no kind of residual card advantage. I think Kaido's better in these types of builds. Like the Fairy Mastermind, this is decent. And then you don't really have great 1-drops. This is fine, but it doesn't really impact the board the turn you play it. And then like this isn't even a fairy, but it just tends to be a good card. We then go to Selesnya counters. So this is +1/1 counters, kind of an artifact sub-theme. So can probably have busted draws with just making like Gingerbrute really big. You could put counters on it through things like Ozolith. You get the activated abilities through Agatha's Soul Cauldron. Sir Ginger in here gets bigger. The Tough Cookie can animate like non-artifacts. It just itself is an artifact, so kind of like synergy in that sense. Some reanimation. You get the Teething Wormlet that gets bigger, so you can assemble like really big creatures. But this deck again is a deck that lacks card advantage, as well as is fairly susceptible to removal. A card you may want to consider if you're trying to build something like this is the card from the Gruul deck, the Royal Treatment, just to give you another protection style effect, in addition to Skrelv. But you're pretty weak to like Farewell, stuff like that. You do have to kind of overcommit in that sense, and then you're not really bringing much removal outside the Glass Casket, and there's not really lifelink to kind of help in those race. Your creatures can get big, but they start off fairly small. Mono Green apparently is still not playable, 44%. So this is a ramp deck. So we got more additional ramp effects and like Bramble Familiar, but a lot of this deals with that same kind of effect where both of these get hit by Cutdown, which hurts. So you do have like Topiary Stomper. The top end's fairly powerful here. The Gruff Triplets won me my pre-release. I had Goose Mother in this in my sealed pool, and I kicked ass. A very powerful top end card, but still, like a lot of these creatures have a tough time attacking into Sheoldred profitably. They all kind of get hit by removal that's usually cheaper than what you're paying to cast it. If you are able to kind of go Awaken the Woods into Nissa Ultimate, it's a very powerful top end though. Then go to Rakdos Rats, very hyped. This deck actually seemed reasonable during early access. It beat me up at least one game, but overall, just kind of playing the rat synergies, 42%. Not going to go too much into it, but like Lord Skitter is a very good card, I think. I think like the Tangle Colony is a reasonable aggro threat. It might be okay. See, I think this card would be better if it wasn't dealt damage and just when it dies as a kind of a replacement. That might be just too pushed because then you're always getting 3 tokens when it dies. But there might be ways like if you do symmetrical damage or just kind of forcing through. But I think something like this and like with Obnixilus could be decent. I don't think you really want a ninja stuff. You do have some of like the toxic, but you're paying like pretty much like vanilla creatures at the most part. And then these tokens can't block, so it's a little rough on the backside. This is Jim Davis's list. This is a deck again that I thought was pretty cool during early access, but just not putting up results. So it's a tokens build, leveraging the Regal Bunnicord to get really big. You have Wedding Announcements, the Lord Skitter, Virtue of Loyalty to make tokens, lets you kind of attack and get that value. Elias to gain life and drain, similar with Vran. And then like some copies of Invasion that you can also attack into. The big thing is like Archangel could give Bunnicord flying. I think Modrak's usually a little win more. Doesn't impact the board the turn of, but I guess if you do have Wedding, if you curve Wedding Announcement into Modrak, it's probably fine. We then go to Sultai Mill, so kind of the various mill strategies. The big thing with this is you got Gruul Somnophage as well as Urborg Lurmagoyf. I do think, so I was playing a version of this during early access. I was playing the 3-mana Wrenn and Tyvar, which felt reasonable. The Tortoise was pretty good as well, just ramping you up, but like the Rithing Necromance doesn't provide huge amounts of value because if you mill it over, it doesn't do too much. And even on its own, well, it's a cheap 5/5, doesn't have like huge amounts of evasion. I think Sticky Fingers is probably a trap, doesn't do much on its own. There's a lot of utility lands in these colors. This deck's always something I'll try because I like playing these types of strategies, but always kind of falls a little short in the end. And then lastly, we're in the dungeons of win rates, 32%. So this is Teamer combo. So Agatha Soul Cauldron, as well as Kami of Whispered Hopes and Sleep Cursed Fairy. So basically, this comes in, you get 1/1 counters. You could add mana where X is, add X mana where X is its power. So if it has enough power, basically 3 power, you copy the ability of Sleep Cursed Fairy, which allows you to untap. So basically you can net infinite mana thanks to the Soul Cauldron. With that infinite mana, you can use the ability from Agatha, and then that will allow you to overrun your team. So you kind of get that value there. You can assemble the pieces with Fauna Shaman. Very fragile combo, but if you want to go with the more janky route, it's something to consider there as well. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Like I said, this is kind of just a quick look, kind of more so highlighting things to maybe avoid into the weekend. Once we get a more depth of stats, we'll get at a bronze tier. We'll start going into higher tiers. We'll have more kind of, I usually like a couple hundred games, or at least some diversity in there. But being a day and a half, just wanted to get something out there to get started. In any case, thanks for watching. Hope you have a great one and stay safe out there.